Indeed, one of the great imams that lived in our era and is from our generation was the great Imam Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah. How did such a man of knowledge, a faqih, a man who was abstinent from the dunya, how did he spend his Ramadan? And how did he spend his final 10 days in Ramadan? The Shaykh rahimahullah, he would, when it came to iftar, he would eat a few morsels of food or a mouthful of food. And then he would prepare himself to go to Masjid al-Haram for Taraweeh and for Isha. He would go before the adhan, before 30 minutes. And then after praying Isha, he would pray Taraweeh, and after that he would commence his lesson. So he went through a day of fasting, he ate a little food, and then he began his worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and after the worship he would begin teaching the people, giving them durus and lessons, and then he would take questions and answers. After that he would stand a portion of the night in prayer to his Lord, and then after this he would then finally go to sleep. And he would sleep in those days, those last days of very little, a few hours in the night. Then at the time of fajr, he rahimahullah would pray with the congregation, and then once again he would begin another one of his lessons. And these lessons would be long. And about 8 p.m. he would start the question and answers for these lessons, which would last an hour until 9 p.m. And after that he would return for a nap. As we know, the Prophet ﷺ, he used to nap, and he recommended napping. After the nap, he would be the one to wake up at about 11:30, and he would wake up some of the students and tell them that it's time for dhuhr, that they should prepare for dhuhr, and then he would go to the masjid for dhuhr. After the prayer, he rahimahullah, he would go to one of the rooms of the shuyukh, and he would be given fatawa. And he would do this for the majority of this portion of the day until Maghrib would come once again. So this is how he was, and this is how he was in the last 2 decades of his life, when he was an established teacher. And he was old in age at that time, maybe between 50 to 70 years old, when he passed away around about 71. In the final days and weeks and months of his life, he was quite ill. He was in hospital, and he had a lot of equipment attached to him while he was in hospital, including the oxygen mask. And he would say to his son, take me to the masjid. And they would say, but look at your situation and you're ill, and look at this equipment. And he said, take me to the masjid, because that's where I find my comfort. So they took him to the masjid, and he continued teaching while he had the oxygen mask attached to him, rahimahullah. And he said, this is my comfort. Just like the Prophet ﷺ, when he said to Bilal, قُمْ يَا بِلَالْ فَأَرِحْنَا بِالصَّلَاةِ, stand, O Bilal, and thus give us comfort through the salah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, give us comfort through the salah. He taught his nation to find comfort in the matters of the akhirah. And that's how the Shaykh was, rahimahullah. And he was not the only one like this. Similar to him is Shaykh bin Baaz, rahimahullah, and Shaykh Albaani. Subhanallah, when you look at their lives, you're astonished. Some people, they said about Shaykh bin Baaz that it's as if he's from the wrong era, as if he's someone from the Salaf, the way he used to behave. That a thief would enter his house at night, and then when Shaykh bin Baaz rahimahullah discovered him and the way that he interacted with him, that person who entered his house to steal from him becomes one of his students and one of his guards. Or that Shaykh bin Baaz rahimahullah, he used to let people dine with him. It was an open dine policy in his house for many years, that people would come in and they would dine with him, the rich and the poor. And when a person from the rich suggested that he separate the rich and the poor in his house when he eats, it's something that upset him. He was someone that they reported about him, when he used to answer questions, he would have 2 telephones people would call. So he'd pick one up and he'd answer. When he'd put it down, they could hear him doing istighfar, saying La ilaha illallah, while he's picking up the next phone. That's how they were in the remembrance of Allah. that when he passed away, rahimahullah, a woman in Africa would ask about him, what's happened to Shaykh bin Baaz? They said, didn't you know he passed away? And the reason why she's asking is because he used to send these people money and he used to spend on them. And sometimes he would even borrow money in order that he could spend on the people who were in need. And Shaykh Albaani rahimahullah was so engrossed in separating the authentic from the weak and the fabricated that you would find him sometimes hours on top of a ladder in the library in Damascus. Shaykh Albaani rahimahullah. He was one that was so concerned about following the sunnah that it led to his own father telling him he has to leave, because his father wanted him to blindly follow some certain opinions, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to follow the sunnah. So he then married without his father, although his father was alive, and that was his sacrifice for the sunnah. That Shaykh Albaani rahimahullah, when he was at that stage and he was quite poor, his students used to cry over him. Why? Because they saw that the great research that he was doing, that is published in volumes now, they used to weigh in the store, they used to weigh the sugar on pieces of paper. Shaykh Albaani would take that piece of paper, like sugar paper, you can get the paper wrapper around the sugar, similar to that. He used to have to take that, he would dip a string in ink, and he would take that string out and he would line the paper with it. So he would have lined paper to write on. And when his students saw this, they would cry. So this is how these men were. They went around hundreds of years ago. They were around while we were alive, most of us. Some of us could have been teenagers while they were alive. Some of us were children while they were alive. And if we're that young that we weren't alive whilst they were alive, then our parents were alive when they were alive. Maybe our elder siblings were alive when they were alive. They were just like everyone else, but they had a purpose and a goal, and they had sincerity inside their heart, and they had a lot of striving. And whenever you think about the Salaf, and when we say Salaf, usually we intend those first 3 generations, the Prophet ﷺ generation, those after them, and those after them. However, Salaf can mean someone who came before you, so you can intend Salaf like that as well. So when we read about them, subhanAllah, we're astonished by them. And we may ask ourselves, what is the difference between us and them? What is actually the difference between us and them? Because when they bleed, it's blood that comes out of them. And when they breathe, it's oxygen that they take in. And what's different is their actions, what they actually did, what they actually do, and that sincerity which is inside their heart. Such that Shaykh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, there was an important meeting in the land at the time, that some of the scholars were summoned to discuss a specific issue relating to the country. And Shaykh Uthaymeen wasn't able to make it. So when he was unable to make it and the people came back from that meeting, he asked one of the people, what did Shaykh bin Baaz rahimahullah say? And when he heard Shaykh bin Baaz's answer, he said, if that is Shaykh bin Baaz's answer, then I'm satisfied with that. He didn't say that because he's a blind follower of bin Baaz. Because these ulama, they would never blind follow when it went against the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah. But he said that because he knew the sincerity of Shaykh bin Baaz. That if he gives a verdict, he's only giving that verdict because he thinks it to be the truth. And that's how these men were. So my brothers, don't be hopeless in your aspirations towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your actions and in your aims and in your goals, because it's possible, because these men did it. So you must strive as much as you can and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid you. Subhanaka wa bihamdika astaghfiruka.